Alright, so I love playing Pokemon games, and every time I play from that franchise, especially the Game Boy and Nintendo DS era, I get a slight sense of home, and I'm reminded of a simpler time where I didn't have to worry about work, bills, or the stresses of everyday life. So naturally, as a tech enthusiast, I looked into emulators to play my favorite Pokemon games on the go. The Game Boy Advance emulators ran very good on my phones, and the experience was near perfect, but after a few years of playing Game Boy Advance Pokemon games, and the hacked ROMs as well, I wanted to try something a bit more advanced, so I got into Nintendo DS Emulation. Something that I noticed though was Nintendo DS emulators did not look very good on the average candy bar style smartphone. The proportions just aren't right and don't make for a very satisfying experience. For this need, comes in the ZTE Axon M. I made a video about this guy a few years back, reviewing the phone as a whole, but I didn't spend a lot of time talking about one of the favorite and most obvious aspects of why you would want to use this device, which is how perfect of a Nintendo DS emulator it is. Even now, 5 years after release, there still aren't very many options for emulating Nintendo DS games. We have the ZTE Axon M, of course, we have the Galaxy Fold series, which would be great, but it's obviously very expensive at this point, and potentially the Surface Duo, and if you really wanted to stretch it, most Android tablets would probably get the job done as well. The ZTE Axon M, though, seemed perfect for this task. With the device, you get the form factor benefits of an actual Nintendo DS, like the two vertically stacked screens, the bottom one having full touch capability, the portability of the small device where you can fold it up closed for easier storage when not in use, and a few extras like the metal build, which feels much sturdier than you would expect for a device this old. So, of course, there's a lot to like here. So I wanted to get into some of the reasons why this was my favorite emulation device of choice, especially for Nintendo DS games. The hardware of the Axon M combined with the drastic emulator makes for a great combo. The screen itself is bright, beautiful, and a high resolution LCD screen, so games look great. But when you go into the drastic video settings, you can really start messing around with the graphics and get some really crisp gameplay. The dimensions of the Axon M give the perfect grip, just like an actual Nintendo DS, paired with the metal build feels great to hold. Surprisingly, the hardware holds up well to this day. After all this time, the buttons still give firm feedback, and the Gorilla Glass 5 has done as good as expected when it comes to resisting scratches. Not bad, considering that 90% of the device is made up of screen. That hinge in particular is truly impressive work. Whoever at ZTE was responsible for the engineering surrounding this hinge needs to be publicly recognized for the quality here. The hinge snaps in place very firmly every single time, and there's almost zero wiggle or wobble room here. You won't be able to close it back up unless it's 100% intentional, no mistakes here. Not to mention, that hinge is also the perfect spot to rest your fingers while gaming. The speakers are also great on this device. They get much louder than you would probably ever need them to be, thankfully with no loss of sound quality. If you're using the Axon M primarily for Pokemon like I am, you know a big selling point in Pokemon games is the soundtrack, and listening on the Axon M will not disappoint you. That's just a quick detailed summary on some of the things that made me love the Nintendo DS emulation on the Axon M, but real quick, I wanted to get into some of the things I actually did not like about using this for emulating games. First is the touchscreen, and it will not be anywhere close to being as responsive as an actual Nintendo DS with hardware buttons. The touch controls just cannot compete with the precision of real buttons, so high action or intense games will not be easy to control on this, and that's the biggest reason from the beginning why I said that this is a perfect Pokemon emulator, because those games are much slower paced and the gameplay doesn't rely on precision timing. The second thing that I did not like about using this for emulation was the speaker placement. If you want to grip it naturally, then you will find your palm resting over the single speaker quite often. As you guys probably know, with single speakers like this, covering it up is going to mute all of the sound. So if you're not using headphones, this can definitely annoy you at times. And finally, one of the weakest aspects of emulating games on this is the battery life. Naturally, smartphone batteries degrade over time, so I understand that might be a factor here, but overall, I can get maybe 2 to 3 hours straight of gaming above 80% brightness. It's more than usable, don't get me wrong. On the lowest graphics and brightness settings, you'll be able to squeeze about 4 hours out of it. But let's be fair to the original Nintendo DS that I keep comparing this to. That thing could run for probably about 15 hours on the lowest settings, so it's just something to keep in mind. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about using the Axon M as a Nintendo DS emulator in 2022. If you can find them at a fair price and emulation is something that's important to you, I think it's worth your time and worth you looking into. Personally, I would love to see the experience of emulating games on a Galaxy Fold, but those things are obviously outside my price range for a niche product just to play old games on. Once the Surface Duo drops, I'd say into the 200s used price, I think that would also be a perfectly viable option as well, especially if you want to play Nintendo DS games on an Android emulator with newer hardware. But either way, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you're having a great new year so far, and I hope that you're looking forward to having a positive, successful 2022. This has been Jordan. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.